You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Welcome to the 21.5 Show, a podcast for professional pilots by professional pilots. Join Dylan and Max, both with experience in flight instruction, the airlines, and business aviation, as they talk to a variety of industry experts, share stories, and have a little fun along the way.
Are you ready for some late night podcasting? Is there anything you like more?
Well, our listeners know you're not much of a night person, Max.
What do you mean? I'm a PMer, dude.
You're an AMer. You have to fly PMs.
I've been pretending all month.
Yeah, you've been pretending. That's right. You've been flying late nights.
Welcome to the show where we have one night owl, professional podcaster and pilot named Dylan, representing business aviation, and another morning man, a gentleman who likes to get up with the sun.
That's me. I'm Max. I am in the airline business as well as dabble in business aviation.
I feel guilty though, Max. I've called you a couple times, like 7, 8 in the morning, and I wake you up, and that used to never be the case.
Well, I had a great schedule. The only problem was it was PMs, and so I just was like, well, I'm not going to trade out of this and work and paddle upstream all month. I'm just going to have to suck it up. I'm not. So, yeah, I trained myself to sleep in. I got an eye mask. I mean, the whole thing, earplugs, like flipping the curtains, the whole thing can be done.
This is more intense than your coffee routine.
I know.
Hey guys, a lot of you have been asking me about my PM flight routine.
Yeah, right.
Oh, man. Well, it's a late night. I know you need to get your sleep, so we're going to get this show rolling here. I actually got a couple night topics that I think will be interesting to talk about tonight. But first, I wanted to start out with a quick little funny story I think you'd appreciate. So, as you know, my oldest son, Gavin, super into airplanes. We took him to the USS Midway a couple weeks ago when they were on school vacation. And that's the aircraft carrier in the harbor in San Diego, for folks that don't know. But Gavin has a special trait that you and your sister, my wife, have, which is you can read something one time and then retain it for forever. And so he has all these books about like World War II airplanes and old helicopters and all this stuff. So anyways, we get on the deck of this USS Midway and we're like walking around, and this like museum docent comes up and he's like, oh, I'm going to show all these kids all these helicopters and airplanes and everything. And so he gets on the deck and he sees this helicopter and starts running towards it. And he goes, Dad, it's a Westland Dragonfly, and like starts running towards this helicopter. And the museum docent looks at him and he's like, how does he know that? There's only like 9 of those in the world. I was like, I don't know, man. I'm sorry. So anyways, I thought that was really funny. But then he goes, there's like one left that works, that's still flying, or maybe it's painted in the U.S. Coast Guard colors. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I ended up emailing our boys, Greg and Ron from the Coast Guard. You may remember us talking to Ron a few episodes ago. But they did a little sleuthing and figured it out. But it turns out it's actually down at the Pima Air and Space Museum. There's a Westland Dragonfly helicopter.
You're kidding.
Painted in Coast Guard colors. Yeah, so we're going to have to go check that out.
You got to go pay homage to that place.
I know.
Pretty soon, now that the weather's cooled off.
I know, exactly. So,
what about the other thing that we did with Gavin this week? Your oldest son. So we were flying on the private jet out to Hawthorne, which is super close to LAX. And when I fly into LAX all the time, I always see this in and out burger that's right by 24 right at the very end of the runway, which is what they normally land on, at least on that side of the airport. And it's a big plane spotter deal. And there's like a little teeny park right next to that too. It's like right at the airport fence. We were going to go. So I said, hey, Gavin would love this. And it's like half days at school this week. So we brought him out with us on our little day trip, and we took him to the park there. And his favorite airplane is the A380, right?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, so we searched, and there was none landing, unfortunately. But yeah, I took this cool video. It was like a 777 or 787, like landing right over his head, and he's just running around. And then I figured out there was an Asiana A380 departure. So we waited for them, and I was like tracking it on ADSB to see on the north side or the south side he was going to depart from. And I'm like, well, they go north to go to Asia. So
right, yeah.
I'm hoping that they're going to depart. And so we're on that north side, but if not, we were like on hot standby to try and race to the other side of the airport. And fortunately, we saw him taxiing on ADSB, on open ADSB. So we're like, oh, sweet, he's coming. And yeah. So anyway, we got to see the A380.
I wasn't there, but the video, you like when the A380 takes the runway, I hear my kid go, "It's bigger than a boat."
It's hilarious.
Anyways, this is entertaining for us. I don't know if this is entertaining for the rest of our listeners, but
fostering the young minds of aviation.
Exactly.
Enough about you and your children. Let's get down to brass tacks here.
We've got a ton of great content today. Mailbag is full, some flight advice, and a really great conversation I think you're going to enjoy with the high-ranking members of the Domestic Operations Committee for NBAA. Great conversation when it comes to talent retention, compensation, quality of life in business aviation, as well as some other highlights from the recent NBAA BACE convention that was just held last week.
A real meeting of the minds, as we say.
That's right. Exactly. Many minds.
I think that might have been a record, too, of the most amount of people
it's
in one discussion on this podcast.
Yeah. Look forward to that. But before that, your kids did anything crazy that you need to update us on?
Actually, I will tell you one really quick thing. So I was flying. It was super clear night. Like, I was up over like northwestern Arizona. So you could totally see Phoenix. You could see Vegas. Like, everything clear as day. It was just super clear and it's nighttime. And I look down and I see the cockpit light up. And I was like, what? And I look out the windscreen and it's the biggest shooting star I have ever seen, like by a multiple of 3. And it was actually in the news and stuff. Like, it was a big deal. And we saw it 12 o'clock right out the window. We both were just wide eyed for a second after it disappeared. And I'm like, dude, I feel like that thing could have taken us out. Like, he goes, you can't tell me that nothing hits the ground from that. It was massive, dude.
Well, that segues nicely into my little promotional read for our friends at Advanced Aircrew Academy, aircrewacademy.com for all of your flight department's training.
They have a meteor avoidance module?
Exactly, right. Step 1, you have to turn your radar into ground mapping mode to detect meteors. No, their latest blog post talks about don't use the force. And it says, with continued appetite for science fiction, we are often memorized by the latest technology mirrored on the movie screen. In fact, kids and adults alike enjoy watching the fast-paced space-based storylines, complete with rocket ships and futuristic weaponry. However, perhaps one downside of this trend for aviation is the mass production and sales of powerful laser pointers designed to emulate lightsabers of both our favorite heroes and villains. So, remember when this laser pointing threat came? I feel like it was like 15 years ago.
No, there was just on ATIS somewhere. I've seen it pop up on ATIS before. And like,
listen to this. The FAA reported that laser incidents for pilots rose a whopping 42% in 2021 to over 9,700 events, which is more than 1 per hour, despite potential fines of up to $11,000 per violation and over $30,000 for multiple laser incidents. The FAA still issued over $120,000 in fines for laser strikes in 2021. While that number does not seem high, there are still a distressing number of incidents that go unresolved. I was a victim, Max. Did I ever tell you this?
No. Really?
Yeah. Speaking of night events in the cockpit, in the Saab, coming into Fresno at night, I remember I just joined the ILS. I was not flying. And I was looking down at the ground and I saw this green thing. And all of a sudden, I don't know how it hit the cockpit so accurately, immediately closed my eyes. And it was very disorienting. And I actually ended up filing a report. And then I went to an eye doctor and got my eyes checked. And yeah, it was scary. Yeah. This was a while ago. It was bizarre. But what was amazing to me is how they were able to actually hit the airplane with the laser from, I would say we were probably, well, if we were joining the ILS, we were probably somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 feet in the air. I was surprised how accurate they were able to hit the plane. So you haven't had that happen to you, have you? Been lasered?
No, not been a victim.
So anyways, I was surprised to hear that it's still up because I guess I haven't heard of it happening recently. I thought that kind of had gone
when you
away.
fly 80 hours a year, Dylan, it's not a lot of exposure,
right.
You know?
Exactly. Well, that's why we only fly during the day. It's risk management.
Other news, too, that I thought was interesting that came out is they announced some pricing on the Starlink satellite stuff for business aviation. And I was surprised. Were you?
So I know for a fact that Elon Musk's airplanes have the high-speed internet offering that I believe is called, KA band. So they know what the price is. I mean, because the thing is after the hardware is spent, there is really no additional cost, in my opinion, right?
What do you mean?
Well, if I'm a home Starlink subscriber and I'm paying, $150 a month or whatever it is, like I'm tapping into the same network if I'm on an airplane. It's not like they've launched separate airplane satellites.
Oh, you mean cost for Starlink? I see what you mean. I'm like, well, it's $150,000 roughly for the hardware installation on the airplane, and then the service plan is going to be $12,500 to $25,000 a month.
Right.
That's why I guess I'm thinking, it's the same stuff.
It's the same thing.
$150 a month from your RV, but then you put it on an airplane, it comes $25,000.
But it's like you're already paying way more for the hardware, but it's not like they're doing anything different for the actual data transmission. So.
Yeah, well, I certainly expected a premium, but I was a little shocked.
We'll see. Are you going to get it for your Murphy Moose?
I'm still within 5G range in that thing, dude, from the ground.
Well, anyways, if you want to read more about the lasers, real threat of lasers, you can visit the Advanced Aircrew Academy blog. We'll have a post for that. Thank you to them for sponsoring the mailbag. We're going to jump right in with the first email. Hi, Dylan. I hope you are doing well. If you recall, I led an aeromedical research group in the United States Air Force studying pilot healthcare avoidance. Our clinical goal is to provide FAA data in hopes of guiding aeromedical policy related to mental health. I'm reaching out asking for your help related to our new study. We are enrolling 50 U.S. airline pilots and 50 U.S. Air Force active duty pilots into a very exciting qualitative REACH study. Participation is simple, a single anonymous 15 to 45-minute interview on opinions and perspectives about the aeromedical system, i.e. what works, what doesn't. While the concept is simple, it is critical that we capture this data to inform future research and policymakers on the current issue. The FAA has eyes on this study, and the data will be delivered to policymakers. Would you be willing to encourage your listeners to participate? For a pilot to enroll, they are to follow the link below. Importantly, the study is anonymous, and every measure is put in place to protect the pilot. And then he sends the link. Thank you for your consideration. This study is hopefully a major step forward in addressing the barriers pilots face in seeking medical and mental health care from a policy level. And that's from Billy Hoffman. Billy was sent to us from the fine ladies from the Pilots Pandemic podcast that we spoke to a few episodes ago.
Awesome.
I'll have a link to that survey. Will you sign up and represent us since I'm not an airline pilot and I don't qualify?
Absolutely.
Thank you for doing that. I encourage any listener that can do it to participate. All right. Email number 2. Go ahead.
Good day to you. In the start of episode 86, you talk about the storms in the valley and where you might have to divert to as a 121 carrier and what might be the reason not all charts are in UFBs. As a corporate pilot, never been an airline pilot, I would wonder if they don't include airports that have a weight-bearing issue. The relationship between ACN and PCN numbers might play a factor in it. Just a thought. Again, I'm no expert. Woody. That's a good thought. I wonder if we even have like gateway charts.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Have to look it up. There's no way to know. We don't have that technology at this point. So we had a couple more people email us. Your coworker, Mike, sent us an email regarding a recent Southwest diversion to a non-Southwest Station airport. Did you hear about this through your company stuff?
Yeah, but Victorville sort of is. It's not a station, but it's an airport we operate in and out of. I mean, that's where all the MAXs were stored. They store, that's where there's some happenings going on. It's like Painfield. Like we don't serve it, but we take airplanes in and out of there for various reasons.
It's not unknown. Yeah, he sent us a great post, and it came from Bob Jordan, and he was talking about the diversion that happened into Victorville. They apparently made multiple attempts to land in Las Vegas, but couldn't due to wind shear. Then the flight planned to divert to Ontario, but it needed to land sooner. The decision was made to land in Victorville. You may know Victorville is the desert where we park our retired aircraft. The runway was available, but airport services were closed and customers were unable to deplane. As a result of these limitations, the crew and the NOC...
Network Operation Control. It's like where dispatch and the whole airline runs out of it.
They all knew it was going to be a long night as they worked through the circumstances to depart to Victorville and return to Las Vegas. He goes on to say, hearing about the situation, employees from Ontario made plans to drive to Victorville as quickly as possible to assist the crew and customers. Their willingness to respond is what we so often see from our Southwest warriors. They thank them for being ready to respond. And then there's a whole other twist to the story.
This is the best part. You can't leave this out.
Yeah, go ahead. You read this part.
So it turns out that San Diego ramp agent and former Southwest ops agent were in their small airplane practicing night flying in the area, and they heard the radio chatter about the flight, so they decided to fly over to Victorville to assist. And the former ops agent had left Southwest just 2 weeks earlier to pursue his dream of becoming a pilot, and he posted a note on Instagram about the situation. And so they landed and I guess helped out too. And the
They had like a picture of 172 next to the...
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Pretty interesting. So I feel like that's a very Southwest story.
Very much. That's why it was posted.
Yeah. Thanks for sending that along, Mike.
This is the first I'm hearing of this.
Oh, really? Well, your boy Mike's more on top of it than you are, I guess.
Must have been off.
Next email says, you guys entertain me, a non-pilot, at 1.5 speed each week. Your show music is actually very nice with some energy to it. Give it a listen at 1.5 speed. I think it's a lot better at the increased speed. Keep the good stuff coming. I'm a big fan, and that's from Mark.
I'm not sure how I feel about it's a lot better at the increased speed. Yeah. But I don't know. I'll have to give it a shot, I guess. Hey, Dylan and Max, I'm a student pilot in Canada. Love the podcast and great in-depth discussions. Currently deciding between flying medevac or for a regional airline. My big goal is to get my visa, cross the border to work in one of the big three, as Canadian aviation tends not to take the hiring needs seriously. Really want to know what you think about international pilots working in the U.S. Thanks, Jordy.
All right, we've been dealing with a lot of this, Jordy, with these international questions. I'm going to set aside all of the regulatory advice and all of the this agency and paperwork and sit for these exams. Let's get real, Jordy. It's time to get on Tinder, Hinge, whatever you're up to, and go to a target-rich environment. Find a young American that you can maybe...
Are you advocating...
Maybe marry.
This is a path to citizenship here?
Yeah. I'm saying you get your citizenship. That's what I'd do. Americans love Canadians. They're so nice. They're so polite. My chiropractor's Canadian. He's just so pleasant to be around. That's what I'd do. I just cut the line.
Well, then there's also the thing of transferring his Canadian certificates to the U.S., but...
You'll figure that out. Once you find true love, Jordy, everything else will fall into place.
Everything else just kind of falls into place. That's right.
Focus on the citizenship.
Well, there's this other thing, too. What he made me think of when he says, what do you think about international pilots working in the U.S.? So now a couple of airlines have moved to be able to sponsor foreign workers.
Right.
For Australian pilots and stuff.
Right,
and the union gets all, everybody's unions get all
everyone gets upset. See, I'd avoid that program altogether because then people are going to give you the stink eye. I'm telling you, just become a citizen.
Yeah. It's good advice, Dylan. Thank you.
We have an incredible program here. Just Google Social Security. I think you're going to be blown away. You're going to want to be a part of it, Jordy.
All right.
Don't look into the healthcare cost, though.
All right. Well, this is a little bit longer interview, I think, than we normally have, but lots of good content. Nothing rubs me the wrong way when somebody cuts a good interview short on a podcast. So,
right. That's the beauty of podcasting, right? You can go as long as you want.
It is, but there's a lot of people that I even wrote a review one time. I was so compelled on this one podcast that I listen to all the time. And I was like, guys.
Did they send you stickers after your negative review?
No. It wasn't negative. It was a 5-star review. I'm like, dude, but just don't cut it short. It's like a 40-minute podcast from the former acting director of the CIA, and he has all these great guests on, and then he's like, all right, well, that's going to do it. And I'm like, dude, this was just, we were just getting there.
There's so much meat on the bone.
I know. We're talking about these huge world events and foreign policy. It's like, you can't. And then I just listened to a 5-hour podcast with Roger Reeves. You know who that is?
Oh my gosh.
Dude, that guy.
This is job one is getting this guy on our show.
Yeah, this is my number one interview. If you guys don't know, Roger Reeves is a guy that was a drug smuggling pilot and started with pot and then worked for the Medellin cartel and Pablo Escobar and all those guys flying cocaine in. His story is unbelievable. And what I really want, all of his book and been on podcasts, which is all for the layperson, but we got to get this guy in here and be like, look, exactly how did this go down? Because
his stories are then I jumped in this airplane, then I jumped in this airplane. I'm like, did you receive any training? How are you getting these engines started?
Landing DC-3s out in the field in Colombia and then tipping. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
Stuff is crazy. It's crazy the guy's alive.
Yeah.
To tell the story. But so, yeah, we hot on the trail.
Hot on the trail. Speaking of good stories, at the end of this interview with our friends from NBAA, we get a good story from Dave Keys, who also has flown some really old airplanes too. So stick around for that. And then flight advice as in its new slot. Stick around for that at the end as well. Here we go. Max, we are so thrilled to have some of our esteemed colleagues and friends from the Domestic Operating Committee of NBAA join us today. Eric Canup, the chairman of the DOC, David Keys, vice chair, and Brian Koester, the director of flight operations and regulations for NBAA. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Yeah, welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, good to be here.
Yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller.
I love it.
They keep letting me back on.
How did they do that? Yeah, you'd think they would learn.
Dave, your days are numbered.
Yeah.
Well, fellas, it was a busy week for you last week. We had BACE in Orlando. That is what most folks know as the NBAA convention that occurs every year in October. Unfortunately, Max and I were not able to make it, which probably saved AvFuel and some of the other party sponsors a lot of money in alcohol. But we wanted to touch base with you guys today to find out what we missed. There was so much great content, so many great educational seminars and speakers there that we wanted to loop in our listeners and anyone that wasn't able to attend. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about how the event went and what we missed?
Yeah, it was great. Fun to be back. Kind of really felt like the whole industry was back. We held BACE last year as well. Recognized then that we were in the middle of a variant surge of COVID and things like that, but it really felt like the industry was back full force this year. Pretty much a sold out show floor. I know the aircraft display was maxed out. One of the fun things about that is the number of aircraft out there seems to be getting smaller, but that's just because the planes are getting bigger, which is kind of fun. It was also the 75th anniversary of NBAA as an association. So we started in 1947. We're celebrating 75 years of business aviation as a whole all year long. And as we got together, the keynotes this year were incredible. We started off with the head of aviation regulatory agencies for FAA and EASA. So we had head administrator, acting administrator Billy Nolan join us. And then Patrick Key from EASA stepped on stage for a short conversation with our CEO, Ed Bolin. And then we brought out Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was incredible. I mean, I heard such great things about him all week. If you've ever heard him talk, he's such a great communicator. And he started off just by showing his intelligence as we were talking about all the things that have happened around the world in the last couple of years. And, talking about the telescope that went out, the James Webb telescope, then Captain Kirk going into space, and he jumps in without missing a beat and says, you're talking about all the things that are happening in the world, but these are all the things that are happening in the universe without missing a beat. It's just kind of showing his perspective on things is always just a little bit bigger than the rest of us. It was pretty fun. Then Dale Earnhardt Jr. came out and talked about his career and how sort of the safety mindset, the growth mindset, the mindset of always trying to be a little bit better at the next race. I had a really fun conversation with Ed about that. So that was cool. And then day 2 was kind of Top Gun day. I know I listened to your podcast a while back, so I know you guys have seen it, but it was fun. They had Monica Barbero, or Phoenix from the movie, come out and talk. And she was there with an actual Blue Angel, Frank Weiser. So he did a lot of the flying. And then Kevin La Rosa did a lot of the filming. He had an L-39 and a Phenom. He used to do a lot of that. So that was really cool. And of course, Tammy Jo Schultz, who's famous for a bad day flying a Southwest aircraft. But before that, she flew in Top Gun as one of the instructors, as one of the bogies that the students tried to shoot down. So she did that too. So it really was kind of a Top Gun themed day. That was really cool.
That was the photo I saw the most on social media, was people getting a photo with Tammy Jo Schultz. I can't tell you how many Instagram pictures I saw of people getting a photo with her. So pretty cool.
She was an amazing speaker. Her presentation was amazing and touched your heart. Yeah. I mean, she got emotional in a couple of the episodes talking about the loss of life, obviously, on board her aircraft. And I think represented Southwest and the Navy very well. I was very impressed with her.
I'm embarrassed to admit that the first couple times I went to BACE, I never even made it to the keynote presentations. I don't know why. I must have been up late the night before or something.
But you made it to all the parties. That's why. I swear, you really got it all out of it.
But last year, I made a point of doing it in Las Vegas, and it was one of my favorite parts of going to BACE. And even the speakers, if you look at it and you think, what do they have to do with aviation? I remember last year they had Rob Riggle, the comedian, come and talk, and I was like, this is kind of weird. But it turned out to be a highlight for me of the show. So I know for some folks, they don't make it to these keynotes. I encourage you next time you go. It's really worth your while. They bring in some really quality folks.
I thought Neil deGrasse Tyson hit it out of the park, but he made some interesting observations about space that it was like, because they asked about aliens and he said that it takes oxygen, and oxygen is created. It doesn't exist on a planet. It has to be created. We create oxygen through plant life. And so they're looking for oxygen on planets, would give them the idea that possibly there would be they haven't found it yet. But he talked about the billionaire race to space. And I thought that was one of the funnier ones. Yeah. And he said, if you take a classroom globe that size and you put, I think he said 2 dimes, right, on top of it, That's as far into space as the billionaires have gone. Because they asked him if he wants to go, and he goes, but I want to go somewhere. I just don't want to go 2 dime widths into space. I want to go to the moon, to Mars, to whatever. That's where I want to go. But I thought that was great perspective. Like we think, oh, they went to space, but he says, if you put those dimes on the globe, that's as high as they went. So,
wow. Pretty humbling.
For billions of dollars.
He was also talking about how today everyone has a high def camera in their pocket. Like nothing happens on the planet that isn't filmed in HD from multiple angles. Yet with these UFOs or UAPs, there's nothing but grainy things or hearsay. Like there's no actual film of anything. He's like, well, he gave the actual number of aircraft that are in the sky at any given point, and no passenger has ever captured anything out their window with one of their cameras. Like it doesn't seem realistic.
Well, that's kind of a good point. The truth is out there, right? Alongside from the keynotes, last question. What was the best piece of swag that you captured giveaways at any of the booths when you were walking the floor? Any good pieces of swag?
I got a Red Bull.
I ended up with a bottle of champagne. That was from World Fuel. After so
Dave
many
wins.
Years, you guys have only been, you just stop the swag. You could tell the novices because they all have the bags and they're grabbing everything. And you bring it home and you figure out how to throw it away. Then you have to lug it around.
That's my move. Yeah. The flashlights especially are a huge hit. So
yeah,
I'm with Dave on that. I think the first couple of years, you get back to your hotel room. The biggest problem is my suitcase was fully packed when I got there. Now I got to figure out how to get all this swag jammed in the corners. And so, yeah, at some point you just give up and you're like, this is just junk anyway. And so who cares? I came back with a pocket full of business cards. That was my reward.
There you go.
For going.
And no pilot can have too many removed before flight keychains, I've discovered. So always looking for those.
100%. Yeah, I've got a bunch of those myself. Well, getting into some of the meat of the event, the DOC and specifically the Small Flight Department Committee, which is a subcommittee of the DOC, put together something called Small Operator Symposium. It was a chance for operators to gather and discuss relevant topics for the operators. Dave, the percentage escapes me. The members of NBAA, what is the percentage that are small operators? It's pretty significant, isn't it?
80% of our operating members are considered small flight departments.
Yeah.
So the majority of those that operate airplanes are small operators.
Yeah. So we put together a panel, we put our heads together and tried to think about what are the relevant topics right now that many of these small operators are facing. And I think it's no surprise that workforce retention was at the top of the list, compensation and finding new talent. All of those things are a real challenge right now for many operators. So we had a great panel assembled. We had Dr. Chris Broyhill, who works with a lot of the salary data that is available for operators. We had Jenny Showalter, who works in talent recruiting. And Dave Keys was our moderator. And also Charlie Precourt joined us for some of the safety topics as well. So we had a really great panel assembled. Dave, you were the moderator for that. And Eric, you were in the audience. So I think it'll be interesting to hear a little bit from each of you about your perspective of the discussion. So Dave, can you start us off a little bit and just kind of give us a general idea of what were the topics, what were the questions folks were asking?
Right. The first session was strictly focused on Chris and Jenny on workforce retention, workforce development. Chris gave some really interesting data. He's a data person. If you get to know Chris, he understands and digs into the data. One of the things I took away was he put a couple graphs up about salaries for small and larger flight departments. And the larger the flight department is, not necessarily the higher the salary range. And in fact, when it got above 4 and 5 aircraft, the average salary range for a crew member dipped below the line for small flight departments. If you think, I'm going to go to this large flight department and make a lot more money, and his data does not fend that out, that you may actually make less money if you're in a very large flight department. That was an interesting takeaway. His definitive statement at the end was that we cannot and we will not compete with airline salaries. And so don't try and think that that's what you have to compete with. But we have a very good quality of life. We have a good salary range. They're on the rise. But I thought those are my 2 biggest takeaways listening to that. Jenny brought a lot of the human factors, like the quality of life. She really brought that to the table. Like when you are negotiating with your principal or you're hiring somebody, what are the additional benefits? And they all agreed the biggest factor is hard days off, having hard days off. And I was shocked because Chris and Jim Lara both said 3 hard days off really meets a lot of expectations.
Per month, you're talking?
Per month. They have to be in stone. They made the point, the pilot needs to pick them, and those are their days off, and you don't mess with them. So those are kind of my 3 big takeaways from being a host. Eric may have a different perspective because he was listening in the audience.
Yeah, a couple of things that I took from Chris in particular was not only the data that you pointed to, Dave. Is it data or data? Who says what? Tomato, tomato? I don't know. I'll say data and I'll interchange them, but you know what I'm talking about. I think what Dave pointed out was that going to a bigger department does not necessarily mean a bigger paycheck. I think Chris pointed out the fact that when you get these comp surveys and they slice and dice them in so many different ways, where do you live? What size airplane you flying? How big is the department? Blah, blah, blah. But he said the only correlation he's really finding to real world paycheck is where you live and the size of the airplane. And I think there may have been one other factor, but you can toss out all that other stuff, the size of the department, the revenue of the company, et cetera. So I think that was kind of an eye opener. The other thing that he pointed out was when it comes to recruiting and retaining people to business aviation in particular, you have to highlight what he called the 3-legged stool. One leg would be compensation. The other one is quality of life. And then the third leg, which I'd never really thought of, but I think it makes a lot of sense, is fulfillment, like being fulfilled when you go to work. And I can probably attest to that. I've did a little bit of airline flying myself, and now I've been in business aviation for, a decade and a half. And I definitely feel more fulfilled, primarily because I'm connected more to what the company is doing. I get to know the passengers. I learn how I'm actually serving my customer, which is mostly internal, to take them where they need to go, versus with the airlines, it's a little bit more of a, for lack of a better term, a bus driver mentality. You get them on, get them off. You never really know who you're carrying back there. And so I think those are the things that in business aviation we'll have to highlight in order to draw people away from that typical airline path. So those are the couple things that really stood out for me.
If somebody shared the story that their company, one of the senior vice presidents, came in yearly to the flight department to talk to the flight department about their contribution to the whole of the company. And the story was that really lit everybody up, because it wasn't just our little micro world of flying airplanes. It was, wow, we really do contribute. We're an integral part of how this bigger entity operates, makes profit, does their business, and we're part of the infrastructure of making it. I thought that was a really good takeaway. Like, senior management should be aware, like, don't just stick them out at the airport and forget them. No, talk to them, encourage them, show them how to make your company successful. And that's part of the fulfillment piece.
I would add too that, and of course, every company is different, but in my company, we carry a lot of sales folks around, and occasionally one will send us a thank you note or, hey, just to let you know, this is what we accomplished on this trip, or the deals that we put together. And so coming from senior management is great, but coming directly from the folks that we're carrying around, getting the job done, the boots on the ground, so to speak, that really means a lot to us. And so that's another aspect that we can improve.
Oh, those are good points. I had a question when you're talking to Dr. Broyhill about the salary survey. Did he mention any tips or advice to directors or chief pilots or anyone really in the middle of a salary negotiation using the data? Did he have any advice on, like, hey, do you just print it out and throw it at the CEO? Do you kind of take little bits and pieces? Was there any discussion on that, Dave?
Actually, Jim Lehrer probably addressed that more than Dr. Broyhill, because Chris is pretty much the data person. Mm-hmm. Jim is the negotiation person. He deals with a lot of large companies in negotiations. How you put together, if you're going to do a presentation, 5 slides, let them know up front, hey, we want to talk about pilot pay, so they have time to process it. Mm-hmm. Get to your point. You've got 20 seconds to make your first point. Get it out front. Don't beat around the bush. Don't be technical. Don't use terms that your principal or the boss is not going to understand. So you have to take the data and use it in a way that they're going to understand it. But what came out was a lot of companies, you're dealing with an HR department or a big company has, for lack of a better term, slotted salary ranges. So you may be an A, B, C, D level, whatever that is. So let's say they classify you as mid-management. You're in this D level. Everybody else in the company who's in the D level is only this range. So you have to communicate to the HR, to the principal, that we don't fall into that. Our salaries, through using the data, are different than what you're forecasting for, say, a mid-level accountant within your firm or a mid-level salesperson or whatever level that is. So that was a really good takeaway that I think Chris and Jim both kind of hit on that. Eric?
I was just thinking, I feel like we're always the square peg. Because if you're in corporate aviation, you're always working for a company that does not do aviation as its core business, right? So there's always that communication gap that you have to bridge. And the senior executives are not going to learn how to speak aviation. So you have to learn how to speak their language and put things in their terms. So the example that Dave just gave is perfect. It's like, hey, we don't really fit in this A, B, C, or D grouping. So we're the square peg. You can't shove us in this round hole. And so you have to come up with a way to illustrate how we're different. We're special because we're in aviation. At least we want to think of ourselves that way. So that's how I say it.
So special. Hey, did they talk to you all about there's a pay disparity, and that is what it is. Like you said, that they're not going to be able to compete number or dollar for dollar with the airlines. But what about retirement? The retirement percentage, there's such a big gap. That's the second piece of the puzzle that why retention can sometimes be a problem. The percentage of your salary that's contributed by the company towards retirement is usually a lot less in business aviation. And that's a lot harder to find because they can't just arbitrarily change that when it's part of a company-wide 401k program. Do they talk anything about what they can do to help with that?
One of the recommendations, which we do, is a bonus program. So you have the fixed percentage that everybody in the company is getting, 6%, 8%, whatever that number is. But you negotiate a bonus bump every year that goes into the 401k, and that could be any number. So like ours normally averages 8 to 10 to 12. Typically, it sits right at about 12% additional above and beyond what our company contributes. So we negotiate that. And that was one of the recommendations. Like, yeah, you're locked into what the company does, but when you're negotiating for the salary, say, well, retirement is a big problem here. So a legal way of you doing it is to take bonus money and put it into the 401k above and beyond the contribution. So that doesn't affect the rest of the employees.
That's a really good point.
It's a very simple solution to a complex problem.
Well, especially too, because bonuses are taxed at a different rate as well. Never take financial advice from a pilot, but
exactly.
I would imagine that it would be very useful to put that into a tax deferred account. That is probably the easiest solution. I know it's a topic that many operators are struggling with out there. So who had that idea, Dave?
I can't remember whether Chris or Jim kind of hit on that idea, because that did come up in one of the questions from the audience with the bonus.
Last question on this was, when you talk to Jenny Showalter, she's working with many job seekers out in the marketplace. If there are that many jobs, there's not that many job seekers right now, but for the folks that are out there, did she have any perspective on, say, this is the type of candidate I'm working with, this is what they're looking for? Did she have any thoughts on that?
And Jenny's a good friend, so she lives here in Orlando. Her and I do a lot of volunteer work together. Quality of life. That's what she's hearing from her applicants. Like, it's not just the pay. It's what does my schedule look like? What kind of time off can I expect? What's the support on the airplane? One of the things, Dylan, that you had asked us to poll was, would you rather get a 30% pay raise or hire a third pilot if you're a 2-pilot airplane? And it was overwhelming. I forget what the number was. I remember looking at the line, it was way over to the right. People in the audience said, we'd rather have the third pilot. And that's what she's finding in applicants that she's dealing and helping negotiate. Like, how do we get back to, how do I guarantee some days off? What does that look like? Do we have trip support, right? We've got a third pilot, or we have a contractor or somebody that's going to support when I need time off. What does that look like? I think that was my takeaway. Eric may have got something different from her.
Yeah, I think Jenny echoed what I continue to hear and see in different survey results is that if you look at what Chris called the 3-legged stool, quality of life always comes out number one. I mean, pay is obviously important. None of us are going to turn down extra money, but when it comes to having a set schedule so that you can plan your life, commit to your family and friends on a weekend activity, whatever that looks like. The one advantage that the airlines have right now is mostly a set schedule, and business aviation doesn't always have that. So what Dave referenced earlier was, even if you had 2 or 3 hard days off that the pilot gets to choose every month, that can make a significant difference in the quality of life. And that's something that we certainly continue to look at here in our operation. That was probably my biggest takeaway from what Jenny talked about.
Yeah, it's funny that trying to get that point across to non-aviation principles is so hard sometimes. I remember I was sitting and having a conversation with the guy that I flew for, and I said, here's what you don't get. You don't pay me to fly. He's like, what? I said, you pay me to be available to fly. That's what the salary is for. If you want to pay me to fly, then we'll just switch to a day rate. And when I'm available, I'll fly. And when I'm not, you'll find somebody else. And that's when the light bulb went off in his head. He's like, huh. I'm like, because that's the deal. And that's what's so hard about business aviation is generally you fly less. And so people equate that as you don't work as much and it's the airlines and things, but it's being paid to be available all the time. And that's where it can be tough because as you all know, you may not fly that much, but if you don't want to know a day you're going to fly, just plan something on that day. And then that's when you're going to
buy concert tickets.
Yeah. Buy tickets for something or commit to your wife to do something. And then that's when you'll fly.
Jim talked about that. When mama's not happy, you're looking for another job.
Yeah.
Jim asked an interesting question of the audience. I'll ask you guys. How many days are a week off? You're taking a vacation for a week. How many days is that? We had 3 different answers from the audience.
Interesting. Okay.
I feel like this is a trick question.
Yeah. So in my operation, when I get the week off, I would book off the weekend as well. So I would take the full 7 days. So I took spring break last year off. So I blocked it off. I got approval. I blocked off the Saturday to the Friday. That's what.
Yeah, I would do the same thing because an office employee, the answer may be 5, but they automatically get the weekend off.
Yeah.
So
okay, what about the weekend after? If you're an office employee, do you not get the weekend before and the weekend after the 5 days?
Yeah, that's a good point too, Dave.
Oh, look at us. Dylan's like, oh no.
So no. I get what you're saying. So we had some folks in the audience, I'm guessing, had an answer of 5 days. Some people said 7 and some people said 9. Is that what you got?
And Jim said 9. If you're talking to somebody who is an office environment employee, right?
Yeah.
And you ask them, you're taking vacation, how many days do you get off?
Sure.
And they'll say 7 or 5. And you go, okay, what about the weekend? You're off Saturday and Sunday, right? Yeah. What about the Saturday and Sunday afterwards? Well, yeah. Okay, that's 9 days. That's not 5 days. So that's part of the conversation that you need to have to kind of open that paradigm to say, oh, yeah, this makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's really operation specific too.
We actually ran into this very early on in our operation because you start thinking about the fact that as a corporate operation, well, I can't speak for everybody, but we're available 7 days a week. We can operate 7 days a week. So the conversation became quickly with the HR department. Well, okay, does that mean I have to take vacation on Saturday and Sunday if I want those days off? When everybody else in the company just assumes that those are just days off anyway. And so you can see the light bulb go on with them as well. It's like, oh, well, no, you should not be charged for those days, but we still want to give you those days off. And so it's a very different paradigm when you start comparing aviation people to kind of average office worker. It takes a little bit of education.
And sometimes what's tough though is pilots are always like, whoa, wait, we're not like everybody else in the company. Our job is different. But then when it works in our favor, we're like, well, wait, no, it's it's turned to our benefit. Well, everybody else in the company though doesn't have to work on the weekends, but
yeah, I think at the end of the day, and I've seen this with some friends that are going through this right now where they're like trying to negotiate hard days off and doing all these things. There's a value proposition for the owner of the aircraft, right? And when their ability to use that asset is impinged, then that value proposition decreases. And so that's why, to me, I think this third pilot, extra pilot thing is more valuable because I wouldn't want an owner to be restricted in the amount that they could use the airplane. I just want to restrict the amount of time that I have to be available to operate that airplane, right? So that's really interesting. Well, to wrap this up, this segment, we had a time of Q&A, Dave. What was the audience asking of the experts that we assembled in the panel? What were the pain points you heard? Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, so we actually ended up straying a little bit into this question about what are we going to do as the talent shortage continues to worsen? Are we going to start lowering our standards in order to keep people in the seat? And if we do that, how are we going to address that? What does that look like? Is your insurance company going to be okay with that? How do you have a conversation with your insurance company about, hey, we normally hire 4,000 hour pilot, but the only person available has 1,000 hours or maybe less. And I think Dave brought up a good point during this conversation, which was, it used to be not that long ago that a 500 hour pilot was not that bad. You could deal with that, but somehow we've gotten into this mentality lately in the last decade, let's say, where 1,500 hours at least. And that's probably a byproduct of the new ATP rule that came out after the Colgan crash. If we're going to dip below that so-called threshold again, how do you have that conversation with your insurance company? So we talked a lot about that. We happened to have a friend of ours who was in the audience and who is an insurance broker. And he gave some really good insight on how to have those conversations. Make sure that you're still mitigating risk, because when an underwriter looks at you, you're a risk, right? And so the more you can do to mitigate that risk, the more they like you, they want to keep you around as a client. So if you can illustrate that to them, and this is what you're going to do to mitigate that risk and talk through it with them, they're not inhuman, obviously, and they're certainly open to negotiating that with you. And they may even have some really good ideas to share with you. That's part of this whole puzzle is how do we go forward? Because we know this is going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately.
We are in the perfect storm right now of massive constriction of availability of training slots at the training vendors, a hardening market in the insurance field with less and less carriers and more stringent requirements, and then a loss of talent going to the airlines. So I don't even know what could be worse, like a fire at the CAE or something. I don't know.
Worse for who? It's pretty good for us as pilots.
If you're current in an airplane right now, a business aircraft,
you're in good shape.
Yeah. I heard Brian's going to get his pilot's license right now. Is that true, Brian?
Well, he has one. Yeah. No, training slots came up a couple of times. Our good friend John Foster, who you know, serves on SFD, his co-pilot put in his resignation. He's kind of retiring, going part-time. So John operates a Lear, and his insurance company set of qualifications. And he's like, I've told the boss, I don't know if we're going to be able to fill this as a SIC. We're going to have to find a PIC, pay him PIC, her, or whoever. But he said the flip side of that is try and get a training slot. I can't see year out, maybe.
Some significant challenges right now. Yeah.
Are you looking for some late night financial advice? Do you want to talk to someone who knows the right way to touch money? It's probably time to set up a free call with our friend and certified financial planner, Tim Pope. He's been helping professional pilots nationwide create and execute a smart financial strategy. Timothy P. Pope, your financial planning partner for all phases of your financial flight. Check the show notes for a link to book your free late night appointment with Tim. All right, back to the show.
Shifting gears slightly, Dave, there was a little safety discussion as well. Can you share some of the discussion on safety topics?
I was very disappointed that I kept asking the audience, we have a space shuttle astronaut sitting up here. Does anybody want to know what it's like to fly the space shuttle? And Charlie was very gracious. He talked a little bit about that, but he is working with the CJP, Citation Jet Pilot Association, and they're rolling out a really neat, low-cost flight operation data program that you install or have this recorder that's low cost and will record like a FOQA. And within 5 minutes of shutting down, the data will come to your cell phone. It'll tell you how you did. Obviously, check yourself. I suggest you use it as a post-flight briefing with the other crew member. So they've just finished beta testing it with, I think, 20 operators, and they're getting ready to roll it out system-wide for Citation Jet operators, but anybody will have access to it. Where we've struggled, in the small flight departments, like, do FOQA, and you go, well, that's a $250,000 investment to put the equipment in. And here they're finding a way that it's not going to cost that much.
So it's hardware? It's a little piece of hardware?
They didn't have a demonstration of what the piece of hardware was, but I think it just sits in your airplane and records stabilized approaches, airspeeds, all those types of parameters. And then 5 minutes after shutdown, it data links into your phone and it sends it to a centralized data bank where they will process all of the information coming in to give you a trend analysis and to look at that.
That was Cloud Away, right?
Right.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so I saw a separate presentation on that, and it was actually giving grades for your approach and your landing and stuff. So you could compete against yourself, compete against your fellow whomever. Hopefully you have a good day. You passed on every given day. But
I'm more stabilized than you.
And okay, so any pilot listening to this goes, that sounds like a nightmare. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want anything recording me in the airplane? Like, that's a lose-lose. But let's circle back to this conversation that Eric had mentioned. We need tools to present to insurance underwriters to pitch the case of we are reduced risk. And I don't know this for a fact, but FOQA data would seem to me to be a pretty strong element to be able to pitch to an underwriter.
Certainly, there's an advantage when you're trying to pitch yourself or your organization to your insurance underwriter, but also there's an element of self-preservation because in business aviation, we have a bad habit of running airplanes off the runway. And obviously, having a runway excursion is generally not good for your job longevity there. So You can think of it in both of those terms. And so we're actually standing up a focal program at my company. But what the CJP is doing is a game changer because it's a really low cost entry point and you get almost immediate feedback, which is just incredible. I was really excited to hear about this program. And that was coupled with what the CJP also did for all their members. And I think it's pretty widely available, even beyond CJP, was they completely overhauled what a stabilized approach should actually look like. And they made it much more realistic. And I think it's rooted somewhat in the Flight Safety Foundation report that came out about 5 years ago, where they actually lowered the points where we've historically said, okay, you got to be stabilized by 500 feet on a visual, 1,000 feet on an instrument approach. They actually lowered those thresholds to make it more realistic. And the reason they did that was because of habitual noncompliance. When they interviewed the pilots, all the pilots were like, well, yeah, I mean, I know I'm not stable by 500 feet, but I know I can save it. I can still get it done by like 200 feet, 300 feet. And so CJP took the Flight Safety Foundation model. It's very similar to what Flight Safety Foundation came out with. And they said, hey, lower your thresholds. And they even have like tons of data on how it's still very feasible to go around at 200 or 300 feet. We do it all the time on an ILS approach. If you don't see the runway, you're at 200 feet, you go around, right? So when you think about it in those terms and making it more realistic thresholds for that stabilized approach, hopefully we see a lot more compliance. I think there was a stat where 97% of our approaches are stabilized, but the 3% that are not, almost none of them result in a go around. So that's where we've got to change our habits. And that's why we have so many runway excursions, which goes back to my original point of job security, right?
Right.
So that's good stuff.
And Charlie mentioned that the beta testing, the initial reaction was, I don't know if I like this. And he said, but as what the feedback from the beta folks was, as they got used to the information and using it, their attitude shifted to, wow, this is pretty valuable. I really like having this data. So yes, I think the initial resistance is, but the data is scrubbed when it goes to the vendor. You just get your data, which you can erase, if you want. So I think there will be an acceptance ramp up, but he tended to say that happened fairly quickly.
You also get to benchmark yourself against everybody else flying your type of airplane. So like you said, it becomes a competition. It's like I'm a cyclist and we have this app called Strava and we're always like trying to outdo each other. So we need to invent an app for aviation.
King of the hill.
Who had the most stabilized approach?
Well, really, when you think about it, that is one huge advantage you have as an airline pilot is you're flying with many different people. Right. And so if you want to, you can make yourself a better pilot because you can absorb techniques that you're seeing from different pilots. I remember at the airlines flying with a captain that really had mastery of the aircraft. It really made me want to be a better pilot because sometimes I just didn't even know what I didn't know about operating the airplane. And so I really got exposed for that. In business aviation, many of us fly with the same people every flight. And so how do we make ourselves better if we've sort of plateaued in a way? So I think that's a cool way to kind of measure that.
Very much so, yeah. I think it's a game changer in our industry as it becomes available and popular.
Ultimately, you have enough data to analyze and then adjust your training to train out deficiencies that you're spotting through the data. That's where Focal comes full circle, is that you see all of that trend data and be like, okay, here's the problem. We're landing outside the touchdown zone, not only our flight department, but everybody else. And what can we do to remedy that or whatever it ends up being,
Yeah. And Max, you have Focal, but you don't, if you land a pull to the gate, you don't get a feedback on how well you did. It may be 2 months down the road, you're going to get a call today, you exceeded.
No, we do. That's what's funny. There's two sides of it. There's this big bundle of data that's sent off that's, I don't really know all of what that encompasses. You have an idea, but it's a lot of data. But after we land there's something called a post-flight report. And it says inside of 1,000 feet, is your max airspeed, your minimum airspeed, your descent rated touchdown, the angle, it has a whole bunch of instantaneous data that you can see if you oversped the flaps, perhaps, right? Things like that you see, after you land. But then there's a bundle of data that gets sent off into Never Land. Then
I want to encourage folks. I was pleasantly surprised, and CAE announced BACE, I think, Brian, that they are also going to tap into the FOQA data for training scenarios. That was one of their announcements last week. But Flight Safety announced, I think last year, that they were going to turn towards FOQA to fashion safety programs, and they partnered with GE. Well, they produced a video. We were in the briefing room, and it's one of those deals. If you've ever been there, the instructor says, well, I have a video you have to watch. And so the first thing you do is pick up your phone because you're this is boring. I don't care. And the video started and it was on runway excursion. All of a sudden, about 30 seconds into it, I looked up and I went, holy cow, this is excellent. It was so well done. And it highlighted 4 airports that we go into all the time as general aviation, business aviation, that had the highest incidence of long landings or unstabilized approaches. Peachtree to Cab, Teterboro, Boca Raton. I don't remember the 4th one. And I think it was Van Nuys. It was a West Coast airport. And they showed you the data and how far down the runway the majority of the planes were. It was so great information. So I encourage you, if you're going to flight safety to a recurrent, make sure you pay attention to the video. Great information.
It was excellent. I watched it as well. I was the same. The instructor goes, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee and push play on this video. All right, buddy.
Exactly.
It was excellent. So I want to shift gears a little bit. Brian, we spent a lot of time talking about the SOS session, but that was just one of many, many sessions. For someone that hasn't really paid attention, just give the listeners an idea of the types of discussions that are available for people to attend, presentations. I mean, there's so many different options at BACE. Can you talk a little bit about some of the offerings?
Yeah, there's panels and presentations all day. The hardest part is picking out which one you want to go to because they overlap. And a lot of times I get feedback on, man, there's just so much good stuff. The only problem is that you have to choose one. If I go to this one, that means I have to miss that one, which is a good problem to have. There was a lot of fun conversations. The big topics that you'll have heard addressed. Workforce, we've touched on that quite a bit here. Day 3, the Thursday is always student day. So we have a full day of student programming on Thursday. A lot of discussions about emerging technologies and advanced air mobility, remotely piloted aircraft, all that sort of wave of the future of aviation that's coming at us. Of course, we touched on sustainability quite a bit, a lot of conversations about how we continue to do what we're doing in a responsible way. We announced the first flight department to be accredited through the NBAA Sustainable Flight Department Accreditation Program, so that was exciting. We had several conversations on safety, of course, we've touched on that, access. We had the chief strategy officer of Boeing come and talk. That was actually on Monday morning for a media breakfast. And that was really exciting to sort of hear someone who thinks at that high level talk about what they see coming in aviation and sort of the timelines and that sort of thing. And it's probably nothing that folks haven't heard before, but the way this guy articulated it made it really fun. Again, I know Eric joined us for that breakfast.
And what's cool, a lot of these, Brian, the software and the vendors that you use every day in business aviation, almost all of them have some type of training session as well. I think Max and I both went to APG that does a lot of the takeoff performance data. They had a great training session.
Yeah.
ForeFlight usually has. There's so much. And then obviously your OEM manufacturer, there's a ton. I know, Brian, who had mentioned you went to a discussion on fatigue. Can you share a little bit about what you learned there?
Yeah, that was fun. So this was a spinoff of the Part 135 Pilot Rest and Duty Aviation Rulemaking Committee, or ARC. So there was a handful of folks in the room who had spent 2 years digging in deep on fatigue science and conversations of what is safe and what is not in the Part 135 environment. We had a PhD, Dr. Stephen Hirsch, come, studies fatigue for a living. So he knows a lot about it, one of the head consultants on fatigue for the FAA. He came and moderated a discussion with 3 operators who were part of that ARC about their fatigue practices. And the 2 big takeaways from that were preparatory versus compensatory fatigue, being able to sleep in advance of a flight, especially if you know you have an evening or a late flight coming up, being able to plan ahead for it and take a nap in the middle of the afternoon, if you know that's coming, makes a huge difference in your level of alertness by the time you have to land. And then, if you do end up having a long flight, a little bit of compensatory rest afterwards can be really helpful. And then the second piece they touched on there was cumulative fatigue. Fatigue is cumulative. So even if you're getting a fair amount of rest in advance, doing those night flights over and over and over again has an effect on you. And so that wears into your sleep bank. It doesn't get completely replenished the way it would if you're sleeping at night. If you have to sleep during the day because you're flying at night, it doesn't get all the way full again every break, every rest period. So those were the 2 big takeaways from that one. And the operators on the group were talking about how they plan ahead for those things, how they leapfrog their crews in sort of different ways so that they are fresh when they do have to fly at night. One operator mentioned they've completely done away with short notice overnight flights. It was a small hit to their organization, but it was worth it to them to improve safety and that sort of thing. So that the pilots, if they have to fly at night, they know in advance and they can plan ahead, that sort of thing. So it was pretty fun. It was a good discussion.
The topic of this one, I would think, was like, oh, is anyone going to show up? But it was called Meet the Regulators. I would be like, is that interesting? But share with us why that was actually a pretty interesting event.
Yeah, Eric or Dave, were you in the audience for that one?
That was one of the most, I think, enlightening. But then you have to decide how much are they just appealing to us or are they sincere about what they're saying?
Did you have to surrender your pilot certificate when you went into the, no, okay.
No, unfortunately, I was on the floor of the convention in one of the areas that they have for speaking. So you could escape quickly if they came after you.
Right. Yeah. You were on the most wanted list they had posted, the top 5. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of escape routes.
Exactly. But now, Brian will share what they talked about.
That was the first time we've done something on the floor like that. We've had the innovation zone down there before, but we had 2 other education theaters on the floor, so it made it easier for folks to get to, which was kind of fun. Lots of folks stopping by. And that Meet the Regulators session was standing room only, 3 people deep all the way around the edge. So that was pretty cool. I'm super biased about how that session went because I was moderating it. So getting Dave's perspective is good too. But I would say we were really lucky with the support the FAA showed us at BACE this year. Super fortunate to have such a high level of support from 400, 200, the different groups within flight standards there. And then on the panel up there, we had Wes Moody, who heads up a lot of the organization's efforts on flight standards policy and the FSDO efforts. And he was formerly in charge of the commercial FSDOs or CMUs. Associate Administrator for Safety, David Bolter. So anyone with administrator title, is way up the chain. He was incredibly supportive and incredibly candid. Gio was the head of airport safety. And then Dr. Susan Northrup, she heads up, she's the federal air surgeon. So she heads up all the stuff with the medicals. Came to talk to us a little bit about improving the process for special issuance medicals, how some of those are super backed up, trying to make that more transparent. Her line in the event was, if we can track a Domino's pizza as it's being made and delivered, why can't we track an FAA medical as it's going through the process, which was good. We came back to that a couple of times. So she talked about that. She talked about how they're starting to undergo efforts to promote pilots seeking mental health help if they need it, being forthcoming on that. My colleague, Mark Larson, has a lot of interesting stats about it's something like 10% or just over 10% of the population has some sort of difficulty with mental health, or I'm not quite sure the right way to phrase that, but they're having mental health issues or problems or need to seek help. And in aviation, the amount of people who actually go forward and seek that is almost negligent. So clearly there's a population of the aviation community that is not getting the help they need, not being forthcoming. And the FAA hasn't done themselves any favors by making these special issuance medicals so hard to get, that sort of thing. And so hopefully it doesn't catch up to us, but we stay ahead of it. But it's something that the community is starting to acknowledge and trying to improve, which is really good.
She gave a great statistic that I think went by a lot of people, that she said this last year, they've had 400,000 medical applications, where in previous years, it typically runs between 200,000 and 300,000. The implication being that people are applying to get medicals that have not previously applied, that maybe there's a turn in the numbers wanting to seek pilot license. I thought that was interesting. She just rolled that out. It was like one of those, we had 400,000 where typically we have between 200,000 and 300,000. So, and she was giving it in the this is a good trend. We're finally seeing a trend of people applying to flight schools and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then between David and Wes, they also provide a lot of good information and insight on things that are coming out. So I think you guys have probably discussed sort of the issue with D095 and 195 MELs for business aircraft operators flying internationally, particularly to Europe. They actually pulled the GA MEL advisory circular a few years. So we've been without industry guidance for GA on MELs for a couple of years now. They're expecting to reissue a draft AC at the turn of the year on that. So 9167 Alpha will be coming out in draft form. They announced that. So that was good. And then again, for the 135 community, they announced that they're starting to address The way 135, 299 line checks are conducted. That's been a big issue for 135 operators is getting those checks conducted. They've just had a hard time. If you have a one-off aircraft or you're adding a new aircraft type to your fleet, you may not have a check airman in-house. And so you typically have traditionally relied on the FAA to help get that done. And the FAA just doesn't have the resources that they used to. So that process has fallen of not working the 135 community. So it sounds like we can expect some new information on that sometime in Q1 next year as well.
And do they have like a thought of, did they share like what they think the solution will be, or that's TBD?
I think it's mostly TBD. We've seen a couple of things. They did tease out the idea that they found the virtual check rides successful. So I see your face. You may not be familiar with that one, where they were basically had a line check airman from a different type in the aircraft, a company check airman, film it with GoPros in the camera, and then they would send it to the POI to review. And if everything went okay, then you passed. And that was it. So that was how they were doing these virtual check rides. And NBAA has a best practices guide on that. Our 135 subcommittee from the DOC put together a best practices guide on that. So that's available on our website. So we may see some more information or guidance on that. I know they have a memo out right now that's not incredibly official. It sounds like they may elaborate on some of that. The other thing he mentioned that they're looking at is expanding company check airman authority. This is a company check, maybe not a type specific check. Is there flexibility to use that in some way, shape, or form? The other thing we've been looking at as we have these conversations with the FAA is there's a provision in there right now in the 8900 guidance for operators to use other companies' check airmen to do 135, 299 line checks, but it's not very robust. And so some POIs are hesitant to use that without any extra detail. There's been some discussion about enhancing the information contained in that section of the 8900 guidance. So we'll see exactly what comes out, but maybe some combination of those or one or the other of those. But either way, that system has needed some attention for quite some time. So the fact that they're able to or committed to giving that the attention it needs, enhancing that process is really, really great news. It's exciting for those of us who've been talking about it for a while. I wanted to touch on the idea that I think this says a lot about the folks who were up there. David Keys was talking about, are they just saying this because they're here in front of an audience, or do they truly mean some of this? Which is absolutely a fair question. I will say that David Bolter, the associate administrator, has a strong background in aviation as a 121 pilot, a 135, 91 pilot. And then his most recent role before jumping in here to the head of flight standards and as AVS1 is running the flight department for the FAA. And they were a true Part 135 department. They had to go through all the checks, all the certification processes, work with the FSDO just like every other 135 operator. So he's well familiar with all the challenges and administrative burdens that come with that. And so I think that recent perspective is leading to some of the decisions he makes, and some of the certainly enhances the way he communicates with the operating community. His candid approach was really well received, I think, by everyone. He didn't always have an answer, but he would say, this isn't acceptable. We know that. We're going to work to be better. Can't tell you how right now, but this is a problem. We acknowledge that. And just like with other problems in life, acknowledging the problem is the first step.
That's what my wife always says to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you're able to put a face to a regulator in a way, because for folks that often are frustrated with bureaucratic red tape, if you can see folks that are in there trying to make it better, and even if they say, look, we know things aren't where they should be right now, and we're trying, I think that's the first step. So I think folks that are listening to this that have maybe never been to base are starting to get an idea of, wow, it's more than just picking up swag and walking around and looking at the booths. There is a ton of great resources available to folks. Next year, it's going to be back in Las Vegas. Should be an incredible time. Max, maybe we just go there and then we just stay there for the Formula One race. Just like move in for a month, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be a big couple months.
Yeah. But do you guys have any advice for folks that are going in 2023? Maybe it's your first time going to a base. What should they be thinking about? How can they really maximize their experience? I'll start with you, Dave.
Find a good pair of shoes.
Yes.
Because I think at one point I looked halfway through the day, I had already done 8,000 steps.
Ooh.
I think the app is a great resource. So plot out some of the folks that you want to see and talk to rather than just wandering around the floor.
Right.
You also schedule what seminars, what sessions that you would like to attend. And I think Brian made a really good point. They're all going to overlap. So don't get frustrated. Just figure out which one that you want to go see and go see it. And then if it's a 2-person crew, send somebody to the other one. It's overwhelming if it's the first time, but just break it into small parts. It's great to meet people that you may have worked with before. I ran into so many people on the floor that I know and work with. The other side I use it is things that I might be interested in knowing, like the advanced air mobility area, to go and just poke around in there and see what the future looks like is so cool. But a good pair of shoes and get well rested. A lot of business cards.
A lot of business cards. Anything to add to that, Eric?
I would say that preparation for base begins long before you ever get there. And I say that because I have met so many people just through my affiliation with the DOC over the last 5 or 6 years. And not only within NBAA and the committee structure itself, but just other vendors as well. So that when you actually get to the show, you're walking around the floor and you see all kinds of people that you know. It's a huge networking opportunity, but it's also an opportunity. I ran into a couple of vendors last week that I really needed to talk to that we were having some challenges with. And when you stand there face to face and shake somebody's hand and have that conversation, you realize how much more you can get accomplished than emailing back and forth or maybe a teleconference or whatever. So just being there in person makes a huge difference. Connecting with other people, getting so many great ideas. And of course, being the marquee event of the year, all these vendors have lots of cool stuff that they're rolling out, big announcements and that kind of thing. And granted, you would hear about it anyway, but it's cool to be on the ground floor when it comes out. And if you're dealing with a scheduling vendor or a ForeFlight or that kind of thing, you can actually get an in-person demonstration. I think that has a lot more value to me. I learned by seeing, and it's easier to see it in person than over a teleconference, so that kind of thing. So yeah, huge opportunity to go there. And I would say this year, I was probably more intentional about scheduling education sessions and also appointments with vendors. And I felt like I got the most out of it this year than I ever have before. I was like Dave said, the first time you go, it is overwhelming. I just remember like wandering around lost on the convention floor. Like, I don't even know where to go. But once you kind of get your feet wet with that, and like Dave said, have a good pair of shoes because you're going to do a lot of walking, but there's also tons of opportunities. It's really great.
I think that's really well said. One last thing. Here's what I did last year. I wrote a little summary to our CEO and I said, hey, here are 4 things we accomplished when we went there. I established a new fuel contract with an airport that we go to all the time. I spoke with 2 vendors about these 3 things. I established a new relationship with, a major parts vendor, whatever it is. But I think for many of us where our employer is covering the cost of going, like show them a little something about what you got there, and that can be valuable to continue your ability to attend.
My company had to cover a trip because I put it on the calendar and they booked a trip.
Yeah.
And I said, they called me.
One of your 3 hard days off?
Yeah, well, right. And I said, I'm committed. I can't go. And they saw the value in it. And they said, all right, we'll get a contractor to come in and fly the trip for the day. And I said, yeah.
Your co-pilot must have been so relieved.
He was very relieved.
Finally got a good time.
Finally. Get rid of that idiot. I know.
Well, last thing before we go, we've mentioned this term DOC before, the Domestic Operations Committee. And it's sort of this thing that if you just are dabbling in NBAA, you might not know what it is. But Eric, as the chairman of the DOC, can you share a little bit about what it is the DOC does and what are the types of things that we create to help operators in business aviation?
Yeah, sure. So let me talk a little bit high level at first. So NBAA obviously has a full-time staff, and Brian is part of that. He's our staff liaison. And then working with the association, there's Brian, a dozen committees or more, a ton of committees, and they're all staffed by volunteers like us, people that have experience in the industry and people that are brand new. That doesn't really matter, but just people that have a passion for being involved in some way. So you got like scheduling and dispatchers, maintenance committee, safety committee, business aviation management, tons of them. So obviously we're the Domestic Operations Committee. Our primary focus, as the name would suggest, is things that go on domestically that affect operators who primarily operate within the U.S. domestic airspace. But it covers a pretty broad spectrum of things that we've actually talked about a lot of it here today. We have the Small Flight Department Subcommittee that primarily focuses on resources for The 80% of us that are actually kind of resource constrained, one airplane, two pilot type operations. We've also got a 135 subcommittee that focuses on issues facing the 135 operators. So for instance, what Brian talked about, the rest of duty arc that we participated in and some of those rules that we would like to see changed, and we've made suggestions to the FAA. And then other things that have come along, obviously hot topics like workforce retention, that's affecting all of us. Supply chain this year in particular has been a big topic. People are running out of tires in particular. That's been a big thing. Earlier in the year when there was a big hoo-ha around the 5G rollout and how that was going to affect us, we were there trying to disseminate information to the membership. So some committees focus on one big event per year, and they put a lot of resources into that. We don't have a big event. The Small Operator Symposium is really the biggest thing that we put on all year long. And so we actually put more of our efforts into consistently delivering white papers and guides and podcasts and articles on the website just to try and highlight things that may be a source of confusion for operators out there, or maybe that they had never thought of. Hey, did you know that you can do this? Or talk about web ops to get LOAs. How do you do that? I mean, it's just all kinds of things that come to our attention. Sometimes it's just somebody reaching out to Brian or somebody on the NBAA staff and saying, hey, I have a question about this. And then they distribute that to a committee that is most well equipped to handle that. And so that's kind of what we do. And so we're always looking for new, fresh faces that want to plug in and contribute back to the industry. Whether you have small operator experience, 135 experience, 91, just 91 in general, and you fly mostly in the US, we're always looking for extra help. So, show of hands for if you want to jump in.
That's really well said. It's been really rewarding for me to be involved in that process. And honestly, it is volunteer, but you almost get more than you give, I feel, for being a part of many of these committees, because you're going to become a better professional. Your knowledge of the industry is going to increase. And by the way, putting something like that on your resume doesn't hurt you at all either. So I think there's benefits to being involved in it, and you can contribute, but it can also be very rewarding for you as well. So we will have a link in the show notes for more information on if you want to get plugged in. There is a committee for you to do it, and I think it will be worth your while. Fellas, anything else you want to throw out there before we wrap up?
Thanks for having us. It's been a lot of fun.
We just need to figure out how to monetize this, Max. Come on.
We're working on that, Dave.
I still want to know if it's data or data. Nobody answered my question on that.
Let us know. We're going to put a poll out. We're going to pull that. We'll start the poll for the SOS.
Poll with the pilots. Good call.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you all at Base in 2023, and I hope our listeners will join us there. Thanks.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks, guys.
We pushed the record button back because we forgot about the stories at the end of the show. And Dave says he's got a good story. So we'll start with you, Dave. And if anyone else has a good one they want to throw in, go ahead.
It just shows that I've been around this business way too long. So I was a second officer at Eastern Airlines. I was on the Airbus. If you remember, Eastern was the very first U.S. customer to have Airbuses. So we got the A300 that had a flight engineer station. It was truly the easiest job in aviation because it was all automatic. You just literally sat there and stared at the paddle. And so I was flying out of Miami. We had a trip Miami to LaGuardia. And captain was a good friend of mine who has since passed on, but he was an excellent pilot. So we were landing to the south at LaGuardia, and it was a beautiful, clear night up in the New York area, clear skies, cool temps. We had circled up to the north, and we were coming in visual approach to the south. And he touches down, and where the runway, if you've ever been to LaGuardia, where the runways cross, there's a little hump there. And so he touched down, and it's not a real long runway, and we come up over the hump, and I'm sitting there thinking, all right, Carl, we need to be stopping. He's at full reverse at this point. And about time I'm thinking that, he says in a very loud, calm voice, I don't have any effing brakes. And so I thought, well, this is not good. I look up and the anti-skid paddle is right above my head on the panel and all the brakes are released. And I thought, all right, I got a choice. I can go to alternate or I can go straight to emergency, which just sends pressure to the brakes. So I reach up and as soon as my hand hits the switch, I looked up and all the lights went out. And so I stopped for a second. And it would be like if you ran down the longest hallway you could think and into a wall. Because his feet are full down on the brakes. And now the anti-skid kicks in. And it was like we slammed everybody forward. The nose wheel was back behind the cockpit. The nose of the airplane was over the front of the fence of the airport runway. And he goes, well, let's see if we can make this. So he turns the tiller and we turn off and taxi to the gate. Of course, we're all cleaning our pants. We go to the hotel that night, show up the next morning, same gate. And he'd written it up and the maintenance wrote, could not take the airplane. And we said, nope, that airplane tried to kill us once. We're not taking it. Get another airplane on the gate. We went to the hotel and I said, we could have been on the news tonight. The 11 o'clock news would not have been pretty.
Jeez. So I got a question for you because I've been nothing that hairy, but like I've been in two types of crews. The first type of crew, you pull up to the gate and you don't say anything after that. And everyone's just kind of sitting there in the cockpit, like silent. And then the other type of crew is like, oh my gosh, you're going through everything. What was it like when the three of you pulled up to the gate?
We were not talking until we got to the hotel.
Okay.
We were all literally in shock and then shut everything down, did what we did, went to the hotel. And he said, I'm writing this up. The captain was a pretty straight guy. He wasn't emotional, but it was like, okay, that was pretty hairy.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
What was your FOCA score on that one, Dave? Do you remember?
Yeah, we FOCA out. FOCA wasn't around at that point. So that was my A300 break story going into LaGuardia.
Wow. Eric or Brian, you have any ways you can top that? Anything in an A330 maybe? No?
I don't know if I can top that. I just took from that story that Dave's really old.
Yeah.
He's talking about Eastern Airlines and the first A300. I mean, things and flight engineers. I mean, when's the last time we saw those guys?
Right.
Now, the first time you crossed the Pacific in the Clipper, Dave, tell us about that.
The Clipper, right? Well, hey, I challenge your audience. I cut my teeth on a Canadair CL-44. Go look it up and see what that is. We flew that thing all around the world. It is a monstrosity.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you hand prop this thing?
No.
Wow.
Oh, it had 4 Rolls-Royce Tyne engines on it. And the tail, the uniqueness of that airplane is the tail swings open to load your cargo. And everybody would go, well, how do you control the elevators and the rudder? And they developed a push system where you turn the control and it would push a rod and it would push another rod. So the rods would beat up. And it was the worst flying airplane I ever flew. It was all tab control.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm looking at the picture of that. That's crazy.
You moved a tab that moved the flight control. So you want to do it. You want to go left, you turn it.
Did you get your private pilot certificate with steerman?
Yes. No, but
Dave knows all about wing warping. He knew how to warp wings.
Oh God. I didn't tell that story to get abused. Wait a minute. Max, the next time I'm on, remind me to tell you about my Southwest story when I forgot to activate the flight plan in the FMS coming out of Knoxville.
You're the only person that's ever done that.
Yeah, right.
Oh, man. All right. That's pretty good. Thanks for being a good sport, guys. Appreciate it. I really enjoyed speaking with the folks from NBAA, Max. I know you and I were both bummed we weren't at the convention. We were receiving many pictures from our friends, maybe not from the convention floor, but activities that were occurring adjacent to the convention, say.
Yeah, we will definitely be there next year. Ain't no mountain high enough.
We'll be there next year.
Yeah, we'll be there.
100%. Okay, let's wrap things up with flight advice here. It's, of course, brought to you by our friends at Harvey Watt. We've got some flight advice for all of our listeners, and that's to visit harveywatt.com and check out the offerings that they have for professional pilots around the globe. It starts with protecting that medical certificate, that beautiful white piece of paper that you carry around so diligently for every flight. What would happen if you lost that piece of paper? What would happen if the feds took it away from you? Is your family protected? I hope so. Visit harveywatt.com and protect yourself. All right, you want to read this one, Max?
Sure. Hey guys, looking for a little flight advice. I'm a 1,000-hour restricted ATP guy who recently failed out of a 121 training program. Had a lot of home life problems and couldn't give my all during training. My family and I moved to Central Florida, and I'm trying to see what my best move is. I have my ATP written complete, but I'm afraid of what this black mark will look like in the current hiring market. My career means a lot to me, and my family is fully supportive. Any tips or advice from you guys is highly appreciated. Thanks so much, gents, and have a wonderful day. Blue skies.
Okay.
That is a tough one.
And that's from Mark. Okay, Mark. This is a tough one. We're starting to get more and more emails, and I'm starting to see more and more of this online. Folks getting into a situation that may or may not be their fault. I think there's a few things that need to be addressed here. Number one, what's happened has happened. I don't think you need to dwell on it, but I do think you need to own it.
But I think the one good thing is that he's obviously not in denial here. He wrote reaching out, looking for help, and trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces here and figure it out. So I feel like he has the right mentality, but what you say is true.
Here's what I'm afraid of, and Mark is not doing this, but I've seen this online for other people. I got a sim instructor that didn't like me. Oh, this guy was mean. This, that kind of stuff I would set aside. Things were out of control at home for whatever reason. You didn't give it your full attention. That's reasonable. And I think just like you presented it to us, you would present it to the next employer that you interview and say, look, I wasn't prepared for whatever reason, or I was distracted for whatever reason, but I learned from that experience, and I now know the type of focus that I need to bring to training, and I'm in the correct mental space to be able to do that, or I've taken care of whatever home issues I have, and so I can do that. I think just talking from James before, the big thing with pilots that have like failures or violations and stuff is that they carry a lot of shame because of that, and that can hold them back because they don't bring it up right away, right? And it's kind of this thing that they try to hide or they're embarrassed of. And his advice that I've always heard from him is like, look, control when you bring it up right away, talk about the experience, don't make excuses, and talk about what you learned from it, be able to move on. And I think that's what most people want to hear.
I love that too, because then you control how it goes down versus playing this game of chess in your head that's not actually happening. Because you're right, it's not going to be a secret.
It's a bummer, Mark, but it's up to you how it's handled from here on out. And listen, I would say if you're really struggling with the right way to craft the response, this is a scenario where hiring a career services group like Raven or others that are out there that can help you tackle this might be money well spent.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly because it's a small price to pay to be as prepared as possible. And the other thing too is you have to realize you're not alone. This has happened to a lot of people that have then gone on to have successful careers, whether it's your situation or a violation or whatever. You're not the first. You certainly won't be the last. So own it, pick it up, and move on.
We're pulling for you, Mark, and you're going to have some other opportunities out there. I can guarantee that. All right.
Let us know what happens.
That's right. That is flight advice. You can send in your quandary to us, info@215podcast.com, or if you'd like to do it anonymously, we have the flight advice form on the website, 215podcast.com for that as well. Max, I wanted to give a special shout out to all of the listeners that have been writing reviews for us and buying hats. I think I shipped out 2 more gray hats this week to Eddie and Scott, and we've only got, I think, 1 more gray hat left. So if you want that last gray hat, visit our website, make your $55 donation, and I will get that into the mail to you as quickly as possible. And then after that, you're going to just have to get the camo hat, which is personally my favorite. I'm surprised more people aren't buying that one. But
really? We have a lot more camo hats?
Way more camo hats. I'm surprised.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
That shocks me too.
Mine camo is so good, it's blending in at the bottom of a lake in Canada. No one's seen it. The camo is incredibly effective. So
not even the fish.
There you have it.
Idiot.
But that is going to do it for episode 87. We have so many folks to thank, starting off with our sponsors, Harvey Watt, Advanced Aircrew Academy, and Timothy P. Pope, as well as all of our friends at NBAA, Eric Canup, David Keys, Brian Koester. These guys are doing a lot of work for the folks out in business aviation, producing a lot of resources. So we salute all of those fine fellows. No thanks to all of those factories that are making those high-powered lasers and shooting cockpits. I do not thank you at all.
All right.
It's time for you to go to bed. It's been a late night.
It is. It's been a rough week. It's been a long week.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, remember,
flexibility is the key to air power. See you next time.
Good night, everybody.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.